Andre's hand came out of nowhere. It caught Lyla across the cheek before she even registered he had moved. The sound was flat and sharp. Not like the movies, not dramatic, just ugly and immediate. The kind of sound that makes everyone nearby go silent and look away at the same time. The rain had already soaked through her coat. Her cheek burned where his ring had caught the skin. He was saying something. She could see his mouth moving, his face twisted into that expression she had memorized over 2 years, the one that told her she had made him do this. But the ringing in her ear swallowed every word. She had 6 seconds to make a decision she would spend the rest of her life examining. If this story found you, hit that like button right now. Drop your city or country in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it before this next chapter ends, because what happens in the next 4 parts will leave you completely breathless. Now, let's go back to that rainy street in Seoul and meet the man Lyla Monroe almost ran past. The night she left Andre Calloway, it was raining in Seoul the way it only rains in October. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just relentless and cold and indifferent to whatever was happening to you beneath it. The kind of rain that soaks through your umbrella and gets into your shoes and makes the whole world feel like it has turned its back. Lyla Monroe had been in South Korea for 14 months. She was 28 years old, 5'4", and had a mind sharp enough that her graduate advisor at Yonsei University had once told her she thought differently than most researchers he had worked with, that she saw systems where other people saw symptoms. She had come to Seoul on a public health fellowship, studying healthcare access disparities in urban Korean communities, and she had been so proud of herself when she got on that plane in Atlanta. Her mother had cried at the gate. Her best friend Danny had made her a playlist for the flight. She had been so certain she was exactly the person she wanted to be. That was before Andre followed her here. He had framed it as love. He was always good at framing things. He told her he couldn't be apart from her, that he had gotten a position at a language school in Hongdae, that they could build something together in this city that belonged to neither of them. She had believed him because she had wanted to, which was the thing about Andre that took her the longest to understand. He didn't manipulate you by lying constantly. He manipulated you by telling you enough truth to make the lies land softly. By the time she understood what was happening, she had already lost most of her friends. Not in any single dramatic way. Andre had simply made it uncomfortable to maintain them. He would be quiet and distant for days after she had lunch with someone without telling him first. He would bring up things she'd told her friends in private, casually, in the middle of dinner, just to remind her that nothing was separate from him. He would apologize afterward, genuinely, with that face she had once found devastating, and she would forgive him, and the next time it happened she would be a little more careful, and eventually she was so careful about everything that she had no one left to be careful around. Her research had suffered. Not enough for anyone to notice at first, just enough for her to notice, the way she'd stopped pushing back on her committee, started second-guessing ideas she would have defended 2 years ago. She had blamed it on exhaustion, on adjusting to a new country, on the emotional labor of learning a language that still felt foreign in her mouth after over a year. She had not yet been ready to call it what it was. Tonight had started with the electric bill. That was what was almost funny about it, in the way that nothing was actually funny. Not an affair, not a public humiliation, not anything cinematic. Just the electric bill, which Andre had found on the counter and decided was evidence of something. He had built a case over 40 minutes in their apartment kitchen, his voice never rising above a certain controlled register that she had learned was more frightening than shouting, connecting the bill to a conversation she'd had on the phone 3 days ago with a researcher at the Seoul National University Hospital, connecting that to the fact that she had been 20 minutes late coming home on Tuesday, connecting all of it into a story that cast her as someone who was lying to him, drifting from him, choosing something over him. She had tried to explain. She always tried to explain. "I'm not doing this tonight," she had finally said, which was the wrong thing to say because it made him feel dismissed, which she knew even as she said it, and she was so tired of knowing all the wrong things in advance and still managing to do them. He had grabbed her wrist when she tried to leave the kitchen. Not hard enough to bruise, he was always precise about that, just hard enough to stop her. And she had looked at his hand on her wrist and something had shifted in her chest, some last thin wire finally snapping, and she had said very quietly, "Let go of me, Andre." He had. He always let go eventually. And then he had said, in that quiet, controlled voice, "You're not going anywhere." She had walked to the front door and put on her coat anyway. She had made it 3 blocks in the rain before she heard his footsteps. He was faster than her. He had always been faster. She heard him before she saw him, and she turned around on the wet sidewalk on a street she didn't know well. She had been walking without thinking, just moving, which was a mistake. And there he was, jacket dark with rain, and his face was wearing the expression she had never been able to describe accurately to anyone, because it wasn't rage exactly, and it wasn't sadness exactly. It was something more like ownership. Lyla. He said her name the way you say the name of something that belongs to you. She backed up 2 steps without deciding to. There were people around. Not many. It was late. The rain had driven most of them inside. But there were some. A couple sharing an umbrella 30 yards away. A man sitting outside a cafe just ahead, jacket collar turned up. A cup of something in his hand. Apparently indifferent to the rain in the way of someone who had either made peace with it or had things on his mind bigger than weather. She had 6 seconds before Andre reached her. She made a decision. She turned toward the man outside the cafe and walked straight at him with whatever was left of her composure, which was not much. Her hair was plastered to her face. Her cheek still burned where Andre's ring had caught her. Her hands were shaking inside her coat pockets. And she stopped in front of him and she said, in a voice that came out steadier than she expected, "He's coming. Please pretend you know me." She did not know what she expected. For him to look confused, probably. For him to hesitate, or ask questions, or stand up with the energy of someone performing heroism, for any of the normal human responses to a soaking wet stranger making an insane request on a rainy Seoul sidewalk. Kang Min-jae looked at her for exactly 1 second. He set his cup down. "Sit," he said quietly, in English that carried almost no accent, and pulled out the chair across from him. She sat. He did not look at Andre, who had stopped 20 feet away. He looked at her, and he said, still quietly, "How long have you been seeing each other?" She understood immediately. 3 years, she said, voice barely above a murmur. "Where did you 2 meet?" "A party." "What kind?" "A birthday party. A mutual friend's." Min-jae picked up his cup with one hand. With the other, he reached across the small table in a gesture that was entirely unhurried and covered her hand with his. His hand was warm. Her hand was ice cold. She watched him do it, and something in her chest cracked sideways in a way she did not have language for. "Good," he said. "Now look at me like you've been waiting." She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the measured attention of a man who did not do anything accidentally, and she noticed for the first time that he was not a small man. Broad-shouldered, still, face that was angular and difficult to read, dressed well enough that the quality was obvious without being loud. There was something about the way he sat that she would not be able to articulate until much later, when she had more distance on this moment. He sat like a man who had never once been afraid of what might be coming toward him. Andre stopped beside the table. "Lyla." Same voice, same register, same ownership in the pronunciation of her name. "I think you need to come home." Min-jae turned his head and looked at Andre with the particular unhurried attention of someone who had all the time in the world and intended to use it. He did not stand. He did not raise his voice. He said, "She's not going anywhere right now." Andre's jaw shifted. "Who are you?" "Someone she knows," Min-jae said simply, "which means she doesn't need to explain herself to you while she's with me." "This isn't your business." Min-jae picked up his cup again. "Then you shouldn't have made it mine." There was a silence that Lyla felt in her spine. She had known Andre for 3 years. She had watched him in dozens of confrontations, with waiters who got orders wrong, with friends who said the wrong thing, with her, always with her. And she knew the particular calculation that happened behind his eyes when he was deciding how far to take something. She watched him do it now. He was looking at Min-jae the way you look at something when you're trying to figure out if it's actually dangerous or just appears to be. He must have found his answer, because after a moment he looked back at Lyla and said, with the quiet precision of someone making a deposit into an account he intended to collect on later, "We'll talk at home." Then he left. Lyla sat very still until the sound of his footsteps faded. The couple with the umbrella had moved on. The street was empty in both directions, just rain and the orange blur of streetlights on wet pavement. Min-jae took his hand off hers. "Are you safe?" he asked. She opened her mouth. She had been preparing to say yes. "Yes, thank you, I'm sorry to bother you, I'm fine." And then she actually thought about the question, actually applied it to herself for the first time in a long time, and the honest answer hit her somewhere below the breastbone and came out as nothing at all. She pressed her lips together. Min-jae watched her without rushing her. "Your face," he said carefully after a moment. She had forgotten about her cheek. She reached up and touched it, and her fingers found the small raised line where Andre's ring had caught the skin. And she pulled her hand away and stared at the rain-slicked table. "He hit you," Min-jae said. Not a question. "It's not—" She stopped. "I was leaving. I am leaving. I just need—" She stopped again. She pressed both hands flat against the table and breathed. "I just need to not go back there tonight." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. She could feel him thinking, though she couldn't have explained what that felt like, only that it didn't feel like the kind of thinking where you look for an exit. "Where's your passport?" he asked. She blinked. "My apartment. Why?" "Is he there now?" "Probably, yes." "Then you can't go back tonight to get it." He said this with the flat practicality of someone stating a logistical fact, not a crisis. "Do you have your phone? Cards?" "In my bag." "Yes." "Is there anyone in Seoul you could stay with tonight?" She thought about it. She thought about the people she'd had before. The researcher from her program she'd had dinner with twice before Andre made it complicated. The American expat group she'd attended 3 meetings of before Andre said they made her distant. The Korean neighbor who had knocked on their door once with soup when Lyla had been sick, and who Lyla had never allowed herself to talk to again because Andre had watched the whole interaction from the kitchen doorway with that particular silence that meant she would hear about it later. "No," she said. Min-jae looked at her for a long moment. "My building has a guest floor," he said. "Staff-controlled access. You would have your own room with a lock." He paused. "I'm not suggesting anything other than that." She stared at him. This stranger, this calm, rain-damp man who had covered her hand with his and talked Andre Calloway down without raising his voice, who was now offering her a safe room like it was a perfectly ordinary thing to offer someone you'd met 6 minutes ago on a wet sidewalk. "I don't know you," she said. "No," he agreed. I'm not saying that as an accusation. I'm saying I don't know who you are." "My name is Kang Min-jae." He said it plainly, without elaboration. She searched his face, looking for the angle, the catch, the particular shape of manipulation she had trained herself to recognize over 3 years of learning Andre's methods. She had gotten quite good at it. She looked for it now and found something she didn't have a category for. Just steadiness and patience, and a complete absence of urgency. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "For a stranger?" He was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone deciding how honest to be. "I had a mother," he said finally, "who needed someone to do exactly what you just asked me to do, and no one did." She held that. The rain kept falling. "Lyla Monroe," she said. "I know," he said. "You told me during your cover story." She almost laughed. The almost laugh surprised her so much that it came out as an actual sound, short and exhausted and slightly broken, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. Min-jae waited. "Okay," she said. "One night." He stood up and retrieved a jacket from the back of his chair. She hadn't noticed it, and held it out. She looked at it. "You're already wet," she said. "Yes," he said. "So the jacket is for you." She took it. It was heavier than expected and warm from where it had been folded. She pulled it around her shoulders and stood up on legs that felt uncertain, and she followed Kang Min-jae down the rain-dark street toward a black car that had materialized at the curb with the silent efficiency of something that had been waiting. A man stood beside the car, young, watchful, the kind of watchful that wasn't casual, and he opened the rear door without a word when Min-jae approached. Lyla stopped. Who is he? She asked quietly. Sung-ho, Min-jae said. He works with me. He won't ask you anything. She looked at Sung-ho. Sung-ho looked ahead at nothing, professionally. She got in the car. The door closed behind her with a sound that was expensive and final, the sound of very good engineering, and the car pulled smoothly into the rain-soaked Seoul street. Min-jae sat beside her but left distance between them. He looked out the window. He did not try to make conversation. Lyla sat with her hands folded in her lap and her soaked shoes on the floor of a stranger's car, and her cheek throbbing faintly where a ring had caught it, and she thought, with the clear-eyed exhaustion of someone who had been pretending for a very long time, that she had no idea who this man was, what he did, why his driver had appeared that fast, or what she had walked into. And she also thought, quietly, underneath all the fear, that for the first time in 2 years, the person sitting nearest to her had not, in the first 6 minutes, tried to control a single thing about her. Outside, Seoul blurred past in rain and light. She pressed her forehead gently against the cool of the window. She did not sleep, but she let herself close her eyes. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The guest room was on the 14th floor. It was not what Lyla had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Maybe something minimal and forgettable. A room that announced itself as temporary. Instead, it was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. The kind of quiet that costs money to construct. And the bed was made with the precise indifference of a hotel that understood its clientele had enough chaos in their lives without also having wrinkled sheets. There was a bathroom with actual towels, thick ones, and a robe on the back of the door, and a window that looked out over the Seoul skyline, blurring and glittering through the rain. Sung-ho had shown her up without speaking. He had pressed the floor button in the elevator, stepped out when the doors opened, walked her to the room, handed her a key card, and left. She had stood in the doorway for a moment, half expecting some addendum, some condition, some version of, and here's what this costs you. And there was nothing. Just the hum of the building and her own wet shoes on the hardwood. She showered for a long time. She stood under water hot enough to hurt and let it run through her hair and over the throbbing line on her cheek, and she did not cry, which surprised her, because she had expected to. Instead, she felt something more hollow than grief. A kind of ringing emptiness, like the space left after a sound has stopped. She thought about her passport in the apartment. She thought about her research notebooks, the 2 she carried everywhere and the 4 she kept in the desk drawer. She thought about the small framed photo she had put on the windowsill when they moved in, herself and her mother at her college graduation, which she had not looked at directly in months because it made her feel the distance between who she was in that photo and who she had become since. She got out of the shower. She put on the robe. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her phone. 11 texts from Andre. She read the first one. Then she put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, still in the robe, and stared at the ceiling. And that was how she slept. Not peacefully, but completely. The kind of sleep that overtakes you the moment you stop fighting it. She woke up to pale gray light through the window and the distant sound of Seoul traffic rebuilding itself for another day. And someone knocking. She sat up fast, heart lurching, and then caught herself. The door was locked, she had checked it twice, and called out, "Yes?" "Breakfast." A woman's voice through the door, crisp and professional. "Mr. Kang arranged it. I can leave it outside if you prefer." She preferred. She said so. She waited until she heard retreating footsteps, then opened the door to find a tray on the floor with rice, soup, a small plate of banchan, and a cup of coffee that was already the right color, which meant someone had guessed at her preferences, which should have unsettled her and instead, absurdly, made her eyes sting. She ate standing at the window in her robe, looking at Seoul in the morning, and she felt strange. Not safe exactly, not okay, but something adjacent to human, which was closer than she'd been in a while. At 9 o'clock, she got a text from an unknown number. "When you're ready, no rush. MJ." She stared at it for a while. She typed back, "Ready for what?" The response came in under a minute. "Your apartment. I'll send Sung-ho. Unless you'd rather go alone, in which case I'll send Sung-ho anyway, and you can tell him to wait outside." She almost smiled. "Almost." She typed, "Give me 20 minutes." She borrowed a comb from the bathroom kit and did what she could with her hair and put on yesterday's clothes. which had dried stiffly overnight. And she thought about the woman who had arrived in Seoul 14 months ago with 3 checked bags and a research proposal and the deep, certain feeling that she was about to become someone extraordinary. She thought about that woman while she brushed her teeth with the complimentary toothbrush and looked at her own face in the mirror. The line on her cheek was faint now, almost invisible, which somehow made it worse, because invisible was how most of it had been. And then she put the toothbrush down and straightened her back and went downstairs. Sung-ho was waiting in the lobby. He gave her a small nod, professional and without pity, and she appreciated the without pity more than she could have explained. He walked her to the car and opened the door and did not ask how she slept. They were halfway to her neighborhood before he spoke. "He's not there," Sung-ho said. Flat. Informational. She looked at the back of his head. "How do you know that?" A pause. "Mr. Kang asked me to find out." She absorbed this. "When?" "This morning. Early." She didn't know how she felt about that. She filed it alongside everything else she didn't know how she felt about and looked out the window. Andre was not there. The apartment felt like a room that had exhaled, the particular absence of someone who usually took up a lot of atmospheric space. She moved through it quickly and with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed leaving in her head many times without ever doing it. Passport. Research notebooks, all 6. The external hard drive with her data, her mother's photo. 3 changes of clothes. Her grandmother's earrings from the top drawer, her own laptop, her own charger, her own copy of a public health epidemiology text she'd been annotating for 2 years. The margins full of her handwriting, proof that her mind had still been working even when the rest of her wasn't. She was out in 19 minutes. She did not look back at the apartment. She had read somewhere once that looking back was a biological impulse, the brain scanning for threat, but she had trained herself out of it with Andre because looking back at him in any context, emotionally, literally, historically, had only ever cost her. Sung-ho took her bags without being asked. She got in the car and said, "I need to go to my university." He nodded and drove. She did not go back to Min Jae's building for 3 hours. When she did, she had spoken to her graduate program coordinator, a small, practical woman named Dr. Lim, who had looked at Lyla's face and her overnight bag and asked exactly one question. "Are you safe right now?" And upon receiving a yes, had immediately begun discussing what accommodations could be arranged without disrupting Lyla's fellowship status. That single, surgical question, asked without drama, had hit Lyla somewhere soft, and she had sat in Dr. Lim's office for 10 minutes longer than necessary, simply because being in a room with someone who asked only useful questions felt like something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Min Jae was in his office when Sung-ho brought her up. The office occupied the corner of the top floor, one wall almost entirely glass, the city laid out below it like a diagram of ambition. It was not a warm room, no photographs, no decoration that wasn't functional, but there was a second chair, and when she came in, Min Jae stood briefly and then sat again, which she recognized as a deliberate decision not to make her feel managed. "Your advisor?" he asked. "My program coordinator. She's arranging for me to move my required check-ins to Zoom for a few weeks." She set her bag down. "I'm not staying here long. I want to be clear about that." "I know," he said. "I'm not—" She caught herself. She had been about to say, "I'm not a problem you need to solve," which was something she had said to Andre once, and Andre had turned it into a 40-minute conversation about how she never accepted help and how that was actually a flaw in her. "I can cover the room. I have a stipend." Min Jae was quiet for a moment. "The room isn't being charged." "I'd prefer it was." He looked at her with the patient attention she was beginning to recognize as his default register. "Why?" "Because I'm not good at owing people things I didn't agree to." Something shifted in his expression. Not offense, something more like recognition. "Reasonable," he said. "We can discuss a figure." "I'm serious." "I understand that. So am I." He said it without edge. 300,000 won a week. Market rate for the floor, actually slightly below. She held his gaze, trying again to find the angle, the management, the softening that preceded control. She found none of it. Just a man who had arrived at a number and stated it without theater. Fine, she said. Fine, he agreed. She picked up her bag. Then she stopped, because there was something else. The thing she had been carrying since the car last night and had not yet figured out how to hold. She turned back. Your driver this morning. He already knew Andre wasn't at the apartment. Min-jae did not look away. Yes. You looked into him. I looked into the situation. That's not nothing, Min-jae. First time she'd used his name. It landed between them with a slight weight. That's information. That's access to information that normal people don't have at 6 in the morning. He was quiet. Who are you? She asked. Not hostile. Genuinely asking. He was quiet for long enough that it became its own kind of answer. Someone who can make sure he doesn't come back to that apartment while you're retrieving your things, he said finally. For now, that's enough. She recognized the evasion. She was too tired to push it. She noted it and filed it and walked to the elevator, and the doors closed, and she stood in the elevator alone and pressed her back against the wall and breathed. She was not safe. She knew that. She was possibly in a different kind of unsafety, the shape of which she could not yet determine. But she was not going back to Andre Calloway's apartment, and she was not going back to the woman who had stood in that kitchen and tried to explain herself for the 1,000th time. And so for right now, she was going to take the deal in front of her and be precise about what it was. A transaction, a temporary room, a stranger who had intervened and was now apparently choosing to remain involved for reasons she did not yet understand. She could live with uncertainty. She had been living with it for 2 years. At least this kind was new. Andre found her on day 3. She was in the lobby of the building, returning from the university, bags over one shoulder and her research notebook open in her other hand, because she had been working on a citation problem in her head for the last 20 minutes of the commute and wanted to get it down before it dissolved. She pushed through the glass door, and he was there, standing 6 feet away, dressed carefully the way he always dressed when he wanted to appear reasonable, which was itself a tell she had long since learned to read. She stopped. The lobby had 2 staff members at the front desk. She was aware of them without looking. Lyla. Andre said her name the same way he always said it, and she felt the old pull. Not love exactly, something more like the reflex of a body that has learned to organize itself around a particular kind of tension. I've been trying to reach you. I know, she said. We should talk. We shouldn't, she said, which was the first time she had ever said that to him in the space of this conversation, and not the space of her own head, and the sound of it in the actual air was different than she expected. Smaller, less dramatic, just words. His jaw shifted. You're staying here. Yes? With who? That's not something I'm going to discuss. Lyla? His voice dropped, taking on that particular register. Not quiet exactly, but compressed, like something being held back by effort. Whatever you think happened, I know what happened, she said. I was there. You were upset. You were reading into things. Andre. Her own voice surprised her, flat, even. I'm not doing this here. He took a step toward her, and she took one back, and she watched him notice that, watched the calculation move behind his eyes, and she was aware in a very specific physical way of the 2 people at the front desk and the distance between herself and the elevator bank. Then a door opened somewhere behind her, and Min-jae walked into the lobby. He didn't move fast. He didn't make a production of it. He simply walked in, assessed the tableau in under 2 seconds, and came to stand near Lyla in the unhurried way of someone who had not been called and was not performing rescue, just arriving somewhere he had business being. Andre looked at him. Min-jae looked at Andre. You're in a private building, Min-jae said. The front desk should have called up before letting you through. I walked in. Andre said it like a challenge. I know, Min-jae said. That's being addressed. He looked at Lyla briefly. Do you want to go up? She did. Yes? Then go. He didn't say it to dismiss her. He said it to give her the exit without making her ask for it. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. She did not look back. But she heard Andre's voice, low and controlled, saying something to Min-jae about minding his business, and she heard Min-jae's response, which was short enough that she couldn't make out the words. Only the register. Calm, irrefutable. The voice of someone who has never needed volume, because volume implies you're trying to convince someone, and this man did not seem to feel that need. The elevator came. She got in. The doors closed. Upstairs, she sat on the bed for a while and pressed her palms against her knees and felt the specific cocktail of adrenaline and exhaustion that had been her baseline for 2 years thinning out, slowly, like weather clearing. It was not over. She knew that. Andre did not stop. Andre regrouped. Min-jae knocked on her door that evening with takeout from a kalguksu place 3 blocks away. 2 containers, chopsticks wrapped in paper, no explanation, just held them up when she opened the door. She stepped back to let him in without discussing it. They ate at the small table by the window. He asked her about her research, and she explained it, and he listened the way that people who are genuinely curious listen, following the thread, asking questions that proved he'd heard the previous answer. "You study systems," he said at one point. "Everyone in my field studies systems. Not the way you described it. Most people look for the problem. You're looking for the thing that makes the problem invisible." She put her chopsticks down and looked at him. "That's accurate," she said, a little carefully. He nodded like it was not a compliment, just an observation. She found that she preferred it. She asked him what he did, and he said he managed assets and oversaw several holdings companies, which was the kind of answer that answered nothing. And she recognized this, and he seemed to know she recognized it. And there was a moment of mutual, slightly wary acknowledgement that passed between them like weather. "You're not going to tell me," she said. "Not tonight," he said. "Is that a promise that you will eventually?" He considered. "It's a promise that when I do, I won't lie." She held that. It was an odd promise. It was also, she thought, a more honest promise than most people made. After he left, she looked at her phone. Andre had sent 9 more messages. She read the last one, which was long and structured with the careful architecture of someone making a legal case for themselves, organized into grievances and recontextualizations, and a final paragraph that managed to both apologize and blame her for the condition he was apologizing for. She set the phone down and opened her research notebook and worked for 2 hours on a draft of her 3rd chapter, and the words came with a clarity she had not felt in months, and she did not examine why too closely because she was afraid that if she named it, she would lose it. On day 5, Sung-ho knocked on her door at 7 in the morning. She opened it and read his face, which was professionally neutral with a layer beneath it that was not. "Mr. Kang would like you to come upstairs. Now." Something in his tone. She came. Min-jae's main floor was laid out differently than she'd seen before. A second man was there, one she hadn't met, sitting at the table with the particular stillness of someone waiting for a meeting that is already uncomfortable. He was about Min-jae's age, with the kind of handsome that looked expensive and maintained, and he looked at Lyla when she walked in with a single appraising beat that lasted exactly long enough to be intentional. Min-jae was standing at the window. He turned when she came in. "Lyla, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay." "Your boyfriend, ex." A slight pause. "Your ex, does he have any criminal history? In the U.S. or here?" She frowned. "Not that I know of. Why?" The man at the table shifted. Min-jae glanced at him, then back at her. "His visa status. Do you know what he's here on?" "A work visa. He said he had a teaching contract." Min-jae looked at the man at the table. The man at the table looked at the top of the table. "His work visa," Min-jae said carefully, "was issued against a contract with a language school that closed 8 months ago. He's been working informally since, cash positions. None of it declared." He paused. "That's immigration fraud." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer directly. "He also came to this building again this morning, 6 a.m. The front desk has it on camera." "He came here at 6 in the morning. He sat in a cafe across the street for 40 minutes before that." The room felt different than it had 30 seconds ago. She knew what this was. She had seen the shape of it before, in smaller scale. The monitoring, the tracking, the patient accumulation of presence that was not quite threat but was designed to function as one. She had spent 2 years inside that shape. She knew every contour of it. "He's escalating," she said. It came out flat. "Yes," Min-jae said. The man at the table said something in Korean. Min-jae responded in Korean. She caught a single word she recognized, problem, and then they continued in a register too rapid for her to follow. "What's he saying?" she asked. Min-jae stopped. He turned to her and said, with a directness she appreciated, even though what he was about to say was not good, "He's saying that your presence here creates a complication for us." She looked at the man. "Who are you?" The man looked at Min Jae. Min Jae said, "His name is Kwon Tae-hyun. He's my second in command." Second in command. The phrase sat in the room with weight. She looked at Min Jae. Second in command of what? The silence that followed was not long, but it was complete, and in it she felt something reorganize in her chest. Every instinct she had recalibrating. The picture she had been building of this man and this building and this situation reformatting around a new variable that she did not yet have enough information to quantify, but that her body understood before her mind had caught up. Min Jae held her gaze. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" "When it became relevant." Min Jae. She heard her own voice, even and careful, the voice she used when she was holding something very still. "What are you?" He didn't look away. He said quietly and without theater, "I run an organization. The kind that doesn't appear in business directories." The kind that doesn't appear in business directories. She held completely still. Kwon Tae-hyun said something else in Korean. Min Jae responded without looking at him, eyes still on her, and whatever he said made Kwon go quiet in a way that was not comfortable. "The guest floor," she said. "The car. Sung-ho knowing where Andre was at 6 in the morning. Yes. The way Andre looked at you in the lobby and decided to back down. Yes." She pressed both hands against the edge of the table and looked out the window at Seoul, at all that ordinary glass and light, at the city that had been exactly what it appeared to be every single day she had lived in it, and was now, in this room, revealing a layer she had not known to look for. "I need a minute," she said. "Take what you need," Min Jae said. Kwon said something in Korean that had the cadence of impatience. Lyla looked at him, and something in her face, the stillness, maybe, or the lack of flinching, made him stop. She looked back at Min Jae. She had two choices in this room, and she was clear-eyed enough to name them both. She could leave, right now, go to the university and figure out something else, tell Dr. Lim she needed emergency housing assistance, and accept whatever that produced, put distance between herself and this man, and this building, and whatever was behind the phrase, an organization that doesn't appear in business directories. Or she could stay and be precise about why she was staying, which was not naivety, and was not romance, and was not the Stockholm-adjacent logic of a woman choosing to attach herself to another powerful man because her last one had broken her. It was simpler and more deliberate than any of that. This man had covered her hand with his in the rain and had not, at any point in the 5 days since, asked for a single thing in return. He had told her a price. He had let her set terms. He had listened to her talk about her research like it mattered. He had knocked on her door with takeout and left when dinner was done. He had told her he would not lie when he told her. And now he was telling her. She picked up her bag from the floor. Kwon Tae-hyun made a sound, not quite a word, something shorter than that. The sound of a man who has been watching a situation resolve itself in a direction he didn't vote for. She looked at him directly. "Do you have something to say to me?" He looked at her, then at Min Jae, then back at her. His expression had the particular texture of a man who has decided, for now, that the battle he wants to pick is not this one. "No," he said, in English, deliberate, so she'd understand it. "Good," she said. She looked at Min Jae. "I'm going to my university. I'll be back by 6. He nodded once. She walked to the elevator and pressed the button. Behind her she heard Kwon say something in Korean, low and fast and sharp, the kind of sentence that ends without punctuation because the speaker considers the matter obvious. And she heard Min Jae's response, short, even, final, and even without understanding the words she understood the register. This conversation is over, and so is the version of it you wanted to be having. The elevator came. She got in. And as the doors closed, she recognized, with the precise, unsparing self-awareness she applied to everything that mattered, that she had just walked into the center of something she could not walk back out of. Not because she was trapped, but because she had chosen, with both eyes open, to stay. And choice and trap were not the same thing, even when they led to the same place. The elevator descended. Somewhere above her, in a room with a glass wall facing the city, Kwon Tae-hyun was already planning something that Min-jae did not yet know about. And Andre Calloway was sitting in a cafe across the street, watching the building's entrance. And the two of them had not yet found each other, but were already, by the same gravity of desperation and wounded ego, beginning to orbit the same dark idea. 3 weeks passed. Not quietly. Nothing in Lyla's life had been quiet since that sidewalk in the rain, but with a kind of structured tension, the way a building sounds during an earthquake, everything vibrating at a frequency just below visible, the walls holding, the windows not yet breaking. She went to the university. She worked on her research. She ate dinner sometimes with Min-jae and sometimes alone, and she paid her 300,000 won every Monday in a small envelope she left on the front desk because she had decided that precision about money was the only way she could maintain the clarity she needed about what this arrangement was and was not. What it was not was simple. She understood that more clearly every day. Min-jae's world had a texture she was slowly learning to read. The way Sung-ho's posture changed when certain phone calls came in. The second car that now appeared whenever she left the building, trailing at a distance she was not supposed to notice, which meant Min-jae had decided she needed coverage she hadn't asked for and he hadn't mentioned. The meetings that happened in his office with men she was never introduced to, whose faces carried the specific blankness of people trained not to express anything in front of strangers. The phone calls he stepped out of rooms to take. She cataloged it the way she cataloged health disparities in underserved populations, systematically, without panic, because panic was not useful, and because understanding the system she was inside of was the only way to navigate it without losing herself inside it. What the arrangement was, she was less able to define cleanly. Min-jae did not touch her. He did not make implications. He asked about her research with genuine interest and remembered details from previous conversations, and sometimes left things outside her door. A book he thought she'd find relevant to her work, once, with a post-it note that said only Chapter 7 in his precise handwriting. He had a dry sense of humor that came out occasionally in the gaps between serious sentences, so dry and so brief that she sometimes missed it and then replayed the conversation later and caught it and felt something warm and inconvenient move through her chest. She was careful about that warmth. She kept it at arm's length and examined it for the ways it might be distorting her judgment, the way she would examine any variable that threatened the integrity of her data. Kwon Tae-hyun had not spoken to her again. She saw him twice in the building, once in the lobby, once in the elevator, and both times he looked at her with the studied neutrality of a man who has made a decision to wait, and both times she returned the look with the equally studied neutrality of a woman who has spent 2 years learning to read men who have decided to wait. She did not like him. She did not trust him. She filed both of these observations carefully. Andre sent 11 more messages over those 3 weeks, and then went silent, which was worse than the messages, because his silences were always premeditation. She knew his patterns. Noise was emotion. Silence was strategy. She told Min-jae about the silence, and he listened and said, "I'll make sure the building team knows." And she said, "What does that mean exactly?" And he said, "It means they'll be paying attention." And she let it rest there because she was tired and because she had learned that with Min-jae, when he said a thing, the thing was done. The morning of the 23rd day started like the others. She was at the university by 8:30 in the small shared office her program had given her, working through a statistical model that had been giving her trouble for 10 days, a sampling issue in her demographic data that kept skewing her results in one district, and that she suspected was less a data problem than a systemic collection problem, which, if she was right, had implications for 3 of her previous assumptions and would require restructuring 2 full chapters. She was deep inside this problem, so deep that she missed her phone buzzing twice, and only noticed on the 3rd buzz because she had set the 3rd buzz to a different tone. It was Sung-ho. A text, not a call, which itself meant something. Sung-ho called for urgent, texted for significant, but not immediate. "Mr. Kang asked that you come back. When you can." She looked at it for a moment. Then she saved her work, closed her laptop, and told her program coordinator she was leaving for the day. The building felt different when she walked in. She could not have named the specific quality of the difference. Nothing was visibly wrong. The lobby staff were at their posts. Sung-ho was waiting near the elevator with his usual professional stillness, but the air had a particular charge, the charge of a room where something has happened and the people in it are managing it. "What is it?" she said to Sung-ho. "Upstairs," he said. Min-jae was in his office. Standing, which he rarely was when she came in, he usually sat, deliberate about not using physical presence to fill a room. Kwon was there too, and two men she'd seen in passing but never spoken to, and a fourth man she had never seen at all, older, with the face of someone who has been having difficult conversations for 30 years and has stopped finding them interesting. She stopped in the doorway, read the room. "What happened?" she said. Min-jae looked at her with the particular expression she had learned to recognize as the one he wore when he was about to say something he had been trying to find the right structure for. "Sit down, Lyla." "I'd rather stand. What happened?" Kwon said something in Korean. Min-jae did not respond to him. "Andre Calloway went to the immigration authorities," Min-jae said. "Yesterday evening, he filed a complaint." She frowned. "About his own visa status? That doesn't... About yours?" The room rearranged. "He filed a complaint about my visa status," she repeated. "He made a claim that your fellowship documentation had been falsified, that you're working outside the parameters of your research visa." Min-jae's voice was even. "The claim is false. I've already had someone review your documentation. It's clean. So it can be resolved." "It can be resolved, but it will take time. And during that time, your fellowship is technically under review, which means your university access could be suspended pending the investigation." She sat down. Not because she was overwhelmed, but because standing was suddenly requiring more effort than it was worth. She sat in the chair near the window and looked at her hands on her knees and thought about her research. The sampling problem, the 2 chapters. 3 years of work that she had continued building even while her personal life was being dismantled around it because the work was the thing she had not let him take. "He knew," she said. Quiet, not a question. "He knew that this would stop your research," Min-jae said. "Yes, that appears to have been the intent. He couldn't take me back, so he..." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "How long has he been planning this?" "We don't know." Kwon said something in Korean. The older man responded. Min-jae listened and then turned back to Lyla. "There's something else," he said. She looked at him. "Andre met with someone last week. We've been tracking his movements since the building visit." Min-jae paused. "He met with Kwon's assistant 3 times. The silence in the room was its own form of detonation. She saw it happen. Min-jae's expression did not change, but something behind it did. A tightening, controlled and precise, the face of a man reorganizing a large amount of information very quickly. He turned to look at Kwon, and Kwon's face, for the first time since she had known him, did something she had not seen it do. It went completely, carefully still. That stillness was its own confession. "Taehyun," Min-jae said. Just his name. Just that. Kwon said something in Korean. His voice was controlled, measured, making a case. She could hear the structure of it even without the language. Min-jae listened without interrupting. When Kwon finished, Min-jae said something short and flat, and Kwon's jaw tightened. "Someone tell me what's happening," Lyla said. Min-jae looked at her. His eyes were doing the thing she had noticed before, moving with a speed and precision that didn't show on the rest of his face, processing, calculating, landing. Kwon's assistant facilitated a meeting between Andre and Kwon. 3 meetings, apparently. What was said in those meetings we don't yet know fully. He paused. But the immigration complaint was filed the day after the 3rd meeting. She looked at Kwon. "You helped him." Kwon met her eyes, and he said in English, deliberate as always, "You're a liability. I said so from the beginning." "So you went to him?" "I went to a resource." "You went to the man who hit me." Her voice came out flat. Not a performance of calm, actual calm, the kind that lives below rage, deeper and colder. "You sat down with him, and you helped him find a way to destroy my career because you decided I was inconvenient." Kwon looked at her with the particular expression of a man who does not believe he owes a woman, He doesn't know an explanation for a decision he believes was tactically correct. This organization doesn't run on sentiment. This organization, she said, apparently runs on men deciding what women deserve. Enough. Min-jae said it quietly, and it was enough. He said something else in Korean to the two men by the door, who moved immediately, and then he said something to Kwon, and the specific register of it, not loud, not hot, something much colder than either, made Kwon stand up from his chair. Kwon looked at Min-jae for a long moment. Something passed between them that Lyla could not fully read. Too old, too layered, the conversation of two men who have known each other long enough to have a full history compressed into a look. Then Kwon walked to the door. He stopped beside Lyla's chair on his way out. He did not look at her. He said, very quietly in English, ask him what happened to the last person he tried to protect. Then he left. The room held the sound of that for a moment. The older man said something to Min-jae. Min-jae nodded once, and the man followed Kwon out, and the two men by the door followed, and then it was just the two of them. Min-jae standing at the window with his back to the city, and Lyla sitting in the chair with her hands still flat on her knees. What does that mean? She said. What he said. Min-jae was quiet. Min-jae. He moved to the other chair and sat down, which was the first time she had seen him look like the weight of something was visible on him. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment, and she waited. My mother, he said, I told you she needed someone to do what you asked me to do, that night in the rain. Yes. What I didn't tell you was why no one did. He paused. She was involved with a man when I was 12. He was not a good man and she had nowhere to go, and I was too young to do anything, and the one person who could have helped, who had the resources and the position and the access, looked at the situation and decided the complication wasn't worth it and walked away. He said all of it without drama, the way you recite something you have rehearsed into blankness because the alternative is something you can't do in front of other people. She died when I was 15, not directly from what he did to her, but not unrelated either. Lyla did not say she was sorry. He didn't need her sorry. She just held it. The person Kwon was referring to, Min-jae continued, was a woman 3 years ago, a witness in a case involving one of our operations. I decided to bring her under protection because she had no other option, and it created a vulnerability that cost us significantly. She's safe now, but the cost was real, and Kwon's been carrying that. Kwon's been carrying it and waiting for a version of it to happen again. He looked up. He wasn't wrong that you create complication, but he still went to Andre. He still went to Andre! Min-jae's voice on those words was flat and final, the sound of a door closing on a room that would not be opened again in the same configuration. Which is something that cannot happen in my organization, ever. He went outside, to your abuser, to solve a problem he didn't have the authority to solve. What happens to him now? Min-jae looked at her steadily. That's not your concern. She held his gaze. I'm making it my concern. I don't want something done in my name that I don't know about. Something moved in his face. Respect, maybe, or recalibration. He'll be removed from his position. Whether he accepts that quietly is his choice. And if he doesn't accept it quietly? Min-jae said nothing, which was its own answer, and she let it be. She stood up. She needed to move, needed to do something with the energy that had been building since Sung-ho's text and had nowhere useful to go. She walked to the window and stood where Min-jae had been standing and looked at Seoul, at all its ordered density, all its thousands of small lives running in parallel below. My research access, she said, the fellowship. We'll contest the complaint. I have lawyers who specialize in exactly this. Your documentation is clean, which is your strongest defense, and the complaint originated from someone with his own visa irregularities, which we can demonstrate. He paused. It will take 2 to 3 weeks. Possibly longer. Possibly longer. Yes. She put one hand against the glass and felt the cold of it travel up her arm. I worked 3 years on this project, she said. Not to him, really, more to the city below. I came here because I had a specific research question that could only be answered here, with this population, with this data. I told my mother I was going to come back with something that mattered, that would actually change something. She paused. Andre knew that. He knew exactly what it would do to me. Yes, Min-jae said. He did. The precision of it. Not the violence of the first night, not the texts, not the cafe surveillance, but this. The surgical removal of the thing she valued most. Landed in her chest with a weight that was different from anything before it. Crueler because it required planning. Crueler because it proved he had been listening all this time to everything she loved and cataloging it. She turned around. I need to call my program coordinator, she said. Of course. And I need... She stopped, ran a hand over her face. I need to think. She moved toward the door and then stopped because something Kwon had said was still there, small and barbed, the way certain things lodge themselves. Ask him what happened to the last person he tried to protect. She had her answer to the first part of that, but there was something else under it. Not the story Min-jae had told her, which she believed, but the shape of the warning itself. Kwon had said it to destabilize, to plant something. She knew that. She also knew that people use true things to destabilize as often as they used false ones. She did not ask it again. Not yet. She went downstairs and called Doctor. Lemon had a conversation that lasted 45 minutes and left her sitting on the edge of the guest room bed staring at her research notebook stacked on the desk. That physical proof of 3 years of thinking, and she pressed her fists against her eyes for a moment and breathed. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work. If they were going to slow her down, they were going to have to do more than slow her down. Min-jae came to her door at 9 that evening. Not with food this time. He knocked, she opened, and he stood in the doorway and looked at her with an expression that was asking something without asking it. I'm okay, she said. I know, he said. I came to tell you that Kwon left the building this afternoon. He took his files and his assistant, and he left. He paused, which means he's not resolved, just relocated. She looked at him. You think he'll escalate? I think he's spent 15 years learning how this organization runs. I think he believes he should be running it. And I think that removing him from proximity has not removed him from ambition. He said all of this with the careful precision of someone reciting a threat assessment, not a personal grievance. I want you to know that because I want you to be careful. More than before. More than before, she repeated. That's a fairly broad instruction. I know. I'm working on making it more specific. She leaned against the doorframe. She was tired. The deep, granular tired that came from spending a day managing the adrenaline of someone else's decisions landing in your life. She looked at Min-jae in the doorway and she thought about what Kwon had said. And she thought about the last 3 weeks. And she thought about the woman she had been on that rainy sidewalk and the woman she was trying to reconstruct. And she said, quietly, Do you know what the worst part is? Tell me. I spent 2 years watching him very carefully, learning his patterns, figuring out how to manage him, how to not set him off, how to minimize damage. I got very good at it. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the doorframe. And then I left and I thought, okay, that skill is over. I don't need it anymore. And now I have 2 of them to read. Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Kwon. And you, she said, without accusation, just naming it. He did not deflect. Yes. The difference, she said carefully, is that I understand why I'm reading you. I'm not doing it to survive you. I'm doing it because... She stopped, looked at him. Because I want to. The silence between them held for a moment, different from other silences they had had. Not uncomfortable, not professional, something more exposed than either of those. You should sleep, he said finally. His voice had changed texture slightly, just slightly. I know. Lyla. She looked at him. I'm going to fix the fellowship problem, he said. I want you to be able to go back to your research. I want that. The way he said it, not as a guarantee, not as a performance of capability, but with the slightly unguarded quality of a man saying something true that he isn't certain he should be saying, landed in her chest in the place where the warmth lived, the warmth she kept at arm's length. She let it be there, this time, just for a moment. Good night, Min-jae, she said. Good night, he said. She closed the door. She stood on the other side of it and pressed her back against the wood and looked at the ceiling and did not let herself name what she felt, because naming it would require examining it, and examining it would require deciding what to do with it, and she was running out of capacity to manage one more complicated thing tonight. She went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. At 2:17 in the morning, her phone buzzed. Not a text, a call, unknown number, and she almost didn't answer, but the hour of it made her pick up. Ms. Monroe, a man's voice, Korean accent, English deliberate. My name is not important. What is important is that you know Kwon Tae-hyun had a meeting this evening, not with his assistant this time. She sat up. With who? A pause, the kind of pause that has weight. With your ex-boyfriend, the voice said. And this time, Kwon was not offering information. This time he was asking for something. Another pause. He wants what Andre wants. He wants you out of that building. And he told Andre how to make that happen. Her hand tightened on the phone. How? There is a man, the voice said carefully, in Min Jae's organization who has been under investigation by the Korean Financial Crimes Unit for 8 months. A man whose records, if delivered to the right authorities at the right moment, would bring significant pressure down on the entire organization. Kwon knows where those records are. He gave Andre access. She was very still. Andre Calloway is going to the Financial Crimes Unit in the morning, the voice said, with Kwon's assistance. And when he does, Min Jae won't be able to protect himself and manage the investigation and keep you safe at the same time. The voice paused one final time. Kwon is betting that Min Jae will choose the organization, that he'll ask you to leave, that you'll have nowhere to go. The call ended. She sat in the dark with the phone in her hand and the Seoul skyline making its mute orange geometry through the window, and she thought about chess. Her father had taught her when she was 8, his one consistent gift to her before he left. And the thing he had told her that she had never forgotten was that the most dangerous move on the board was never the one coming at your king. It was always the one coming at the piece protecting your king. She was the piece. And Kwon and Andre had just moved. She got up and put on her shoes and her jacket and went upstairs. Min Jae answered the door in 30 seconds, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either, which told her things she filed and did not examine. He looked at her face and stepped back from the door, and she walked in and told him everything, every word, all of it. And she watched his expression do the thing it did when he was reorganizing large amounts of information very quickly. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, he gave him the Hanum records. And the way he said it, the specific weight of those words, the particular quality of what moved across his face, told her that whatever the Hanum records were, they were not just a legal complication. They were the kind of thing that changed everything. He looked at her, and for the first time since the rainy sidewalk, she saw something in his face that she had not seen before. Not fear, exactly, but the older cousin of fear, the thing that lives in men who do not allow themselves to be afraid, but have just received information that strips the available options down to a number small enough to count on one hand. We have to leave, he said. She looked at him. Tonight, he said. Right now, both of us. And somewhere in the city, in a room she could not see, Andre Calloway sat across from Kwon Tae-hyun with a folder of documents between them, and he was smiling the small, controlled smile of a man who has finally found the lever. They left with 40 minutes to spare. That was how Min Jae explained it to her later, in the safe house, when she asked how close it had actually been. 40 minutes between the moment they walked out of the building's service exit and the moment 2 unmarked cars from the Financial Crimes Unit pulled up to the front entrance. Sung-ho had gotten the alert from someone inside the unit, a contact maintained for exactly this category of emergency, and the alert had come at 3:41 in the morning, which meant they had been moving by 3:45 and gone by 4:10, and the cars had arrived at 4:50. 40 minutes. She did not ask how Min Jae had a contact inside the Financial Crimes Unit. She was learning which questions to hold. The safe house was 2 hours outside Seoul, in a valley that had probably been beautiful in better circumstances. Mountains on 3 sides, a single road in, The nearest town a 20-minute drive that felt longer in the dark. The house itself was low and concrete and functional, the kind of place that had been designed by someone who understood that safety and comfort were not the same category. There were 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with the basics, and a room at the back that Min Jae converted into a working space within 30 minutes of arriving, because Min Jae, she was learning, did not process crisis by going still. He processed it by immediately building the next structure. She sat at the kitchen table and drank the coffee that Sung Ho made. Sung Ho, who had appeared at the service exit with 2 bags already packed as though he had known before any of them that this night was coming. And she looked at her research notebooks, which she had grabbed on instinct along with her passport and her hard drive and her grandmother's earrings, and she thought about how funny it was that when your life contracted to what you could carry in 15 minutes, you found out very clearly what you actually valued. The notebooks, the earrings, her data, the book with the annotated margins. She had not grabbed anything of Andre's. There was nothing of Andre's she wanted. 2 other men arrived by 6 in the morning. She didn't know their names and didn't ask, reading the room well enough to understand that this was not the moment for introductions. They spoke with Min Jae in low, rapid Korean in the back room, and then deployed themselves around the perimeter of the property with the efficient purposefulness of people who had done this before. Min Jae emerged at 7 and sat across from her at the kitchen table. He looked like a man who had slept 0 hours and intended to sleep 0 more. There were specific tells, the slight tension in his jaw, the way he held his coffee cup without drinking from it, the quality of stillness he had that was different from his usual stillness, less patient and more coiled. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He set the cup down. "The Hanum records document a series of financial transactions over 4 years that connect 3 members of my organization to a money laundering operation that the Financial Crimes Unit has been building a case against. The records weren't supposed to exist in that form. They were supposed to have been restructured." He paused. They weren't, and Kwon knew that because he was the one responsible for ensuring they were. She absorbed that. He kept them. He kept them as insurance, in case he ever needed leverage against me. And now he's given them to Andre, who's given them to the authorities. Yes. Why Andre? Why not go directly? Because Kwon going directly exposes him to blowback from within the organization. Men who are still loyal to me. If the complaint originates externally from a foreign national with no apparent connection to internal politics, Kwon keeps distance. Min Jae's voice was precise and emotionless, the voice he used when he was being purely analytical. It was smart. It was also personal, she said. He looked at her. He used Andre, specifically. Not because Andre was the most efficient vector. He could have found other external sources. But because using Andre sends a message to you. She held his gaze. It says, your weakness is her, and I found hers, and I put them together. Min Jae was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. That's also true. So what do we do? He stood up and went to the window and looked at the mountains, and she watched his back and waited. The records can be contested, he said. The transactions they document are real, but they're incomplete. Context matters in financial crime cases. The full picture of those transactions shows something different than what the partial records suggest. He turned around. I have a lawyer who can make that case. What I need is time for him to build it, and I need the original documentation that would provide the missing context. Where is it? In my office, in Seoul. She looked at him. The office that's currently under surveillance by the Financial Crimes Unit. Yes. So we need to get it out. Someone does, he said. Not me. I can't go back to Seoul right now without risking being detained, which stops everything. She waited. I'm not asking you, he said immediately, reading her face. That's not what I'm saying. Then say what you're saying. I'm saying I have people working on it. I'm saying it will take time. I'm saying that while that's happening, we stay here. We stay off visible communications, and we... He stopped. She watched him find the next word and not love it. We wait. You hate that, she said. I hate that, he said. It was the most unguarded thing she had heard him say. It lasted exactly 1 second before he pulled it back behind the usual composed surface, but she had seen it, and she held it quietly. The day ground forward. She set up her laptop at the kitchen table and worked on her research because working was the only thing that kept the specific kind of dread, the low, persistent dread of a situation you cannot control, from occupying all available space in her head. She restructured 2 sections of her 3rd chapter. She sent an email to Dr. Lim from a secondary email address explaining that she was dealing with a personal emergency and would be in contact about timeline adjustments. She did not explain further because she had no explanation that would make sense in the context of Dr. Lim's world. Min-jae worked in the back room. She heard his voice occasionally through the wall, low, fast, Korean. And once she heard something that sounded like a fist on a table, once, controlled, and then silence. Sung-ho cooked in the afternoon. Rice, soup, something with pork that smelled like a kitchen rather than a crisis. And they all ate together at the kitchen table with the specific silence of people who are not avoiding conversation, but have run through all the available conversations and arrived at the temporary peace of just eating. The call came at 8:17 that evening. Min-jae took it in the back room. She was washing dishes when she heard the change in his voice. Not the words, just the tone, the specific register that lives below language and communicates pure information, and she turned off the water and stood very still. He came out 4 minutes later. She looked at his face. Kwon isn't waiting for the legal case to run its course, Min-jae said. What does that mean? It means he's moved faster than I expected. He's been reaching out to the other lieutenants, men who were my men. He's been a pause. The pause of someone choosing between several words and not loving any of them. Reframing my absence as abandonment. He's calling a power play. He's calling a power play. Min-jae sat down. Not his usual controlled sitting, he sat with the weight of a man who has just recalculated and does not love the new total. 3 of the 7 have gone quiet, which means they're listening to him. And the other 4? Loyal, for now, but loyalty without information gets expensive fast. He looked at the table. I have to go back. She felt the words land in her chest. You said, I know what I said. You said you'd be detained. I said I risked being detained. That was before Kwon started consolidating. If I wait for the legal case to clear, I may not have an organization to return to. He said it flat and clean, the way you state a mathematical fact that has personal consequences. Kwon is betting I'll stay hidden. He needs 2 more days, maybe 3, to lock down enough of the structure that even if I come back to something I can't recover. She was quiet for a moment. So you go back tomorrow. Tonight. She stared at him. Min-jae. The longer I wait, the worse the odds. The odds are also bad if you get detained on the way in. I know. He looked at her directly. I'm not asking you to be comfortable with this. I'm not uncomfortable with it, she said, and surprised herself with how true that was. She was scared. That was specific and honest. She was scared in the way you are scared when something you have come to depend on more than you intended to is about to walk into a situation it might not walk out of. I'm scared. That's different from uncomfortable. He looked at her with the expression she had come to recognize as the one reserved for moments when she said something that reached him somewhere below the management layer. I know, he said. Again. What do I do, she said, while you're gone? Stay here. Sung-ho stays with you. Don't use your regular phone. He reached into his jacket and put a second phone on the table. Cheap, prepaid, 2 numbers programmed into it. That's me and that's Sung-ho. That's all you need. She looked at the phone. She looked at him. Tell me one thing, she said. Yes. Is there a version of this where you don't come back? The question landed between them, and neither of them pretended it hadn't. Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. Not evasive quiet. Thinking quiet. The kind she had learned to wait out. There's always that version, he said. In my work. Every time. And tonight? Tonight the odds are... He paused. Not my worst. That's not reassuring. I know. I don't think you want me to reassure you. He said it simply. I think you want me to be honest. She looked at him across the table, This man she had followed into a situation she had not fully understood on a rainy sidewalk 3 weeks ago, and who had not, in all the time since, tried to make her smaller or quieter or more manageable, who had listened to her think out loud and eaten dinner with her, and left books outside her door and stood in lobbies without being called, and told her the truth even when it was complicated. This man who ran something she couldn't name in polite company, and who was about to drive back into Seoul in the middle of the night to save an empire he'd built from nothing. "Come back," she said. Not a request, not a plea, just a statement of what she needed, clean and direct. He looked at her for a moment, and something in his face did what it rarely did. It opened, briefly, just enough. "Yes," he said. He left at 9:30. Black car, lights off until the road. Sung-ho watching from the doorway until the car disappeared around the mountain road's first bend. Lyla went inside and sat at the kitchen table with her research notebooks and the prepaid phone and the specific silence of a house that has just lost its center of gravity. She worked until 1 in the morning. Then she lay on the bed in her clothes and looked at the ceiling and listened to the valley. Min-jae drove back into Seoul like a man who had done this before, but which he had different crises, different shapes, but the same fundamental experience of moving toward danger because stillness had become more dangerous than motion. He went to a secondary location first, not the main building, a quiet office in Mapo that the financial crimes investigation had no flag on. His lawyer was there. 2 of the 4 loyal lieutenants were there. A man named Park, who handled communications, had arrived with a laptop and a face that said, "This has been a very long night already." They worked through the documentation until 4 in the morning. The lawyer, a small, relentless man named Oh Se-jun, who had been extracting Min-jae's organization from legal complications for 11 years, laid out the case with the methodical clarity of someone who has learned that panic is expensive and precision is not. "The partial records make it look like a direct laundering structure," Oh Se-jun said. "The complete picture shows something more complicated. The transactions were layered through 3 subsidiary companies as part of a restructuring agreement that was fully documented and legal on its face." He paused. "The problem is that restructuring agreement exists in the Hanam office files, which we can't access, which we currently cannot access." Oh Se-jun's emphasis on currently was deliberate. But access is not the only route. If we can demonstrate to the unit that the transactions have a documented counterpart, that they haven't been provided, we can compel them to delay action pending full disclosure. It buys time. How much time? A week. Possibly 2. "That's enough?" Min-jae said. "For the legal case," Oh Se-jun said carefully. "The other problem..." He looked at the lieutenant to Min-jae's left, a man named Choi, who had been with the organization for 12 years and who had the face of someone carrying information he does not want to deliver. "Say it," Min-jae said. Choi said it. Kwon had not just been talking to the 3 lieutenants who'd gone quiet. He had been talking to the men below them, the operational layer, the people who ran the day-to-day, the ones whose loyalty was practical rather than personal. He had made promises. Money, positions, the specific calibrated promises of a man who understood that loyalty in this industry was partly principle and mostly math. "How many?" Min-jae said. Choi looked at the table. "Enough to make tomorrow difficult." The room held that. Min-jae stood up and walked to the window. Seoul at 4 in the morning, different from Seoul at any other hour. Thinner, quieter, the version of the city that exists when most of its people are not watching. He had loved the city for reasons he had never fully articulated because articulation was not his primary language. He had built something in it that was not clean and was not simple and was not the thing his mother had hoped for him, but that was his, the first thing in his life that had been completely and entirely his. He turned around. "Set up the disclosure filing for 7 a.m., he said to Oh Se-jun. "Then call the unit's lead investigator directly. Don't go through channels, call him." He looked at Choi. "Get me a location on Kwon. Don't approach him, just location." "And the men he's flipped?" Choi asked. "Let them be, for now. Men flip back when the wind changes." He said it without bitterness. It was a logistical observation. The wind is going to change. He said it with the certainty of a man who intended to be the wind. By 7:30 in the morning, Oh Sejun had filed the disclosure and made the call, and the Financial Crimes Unit had agreed, reluctantly, through a duty officer who sounded like he'd also been awake all night, to a 72-hour hold on formal action pending review of the additional documentation. 72 hours. Min-jae texted the prepaid phone. Bought 3 days. Working. In the Valley safe house, Lyla's phone buzzed on the nightstand, and she was awake before the second buzz, which told her she had not actually slept as deeply as she'd believed. She read the text and pressed her palm against her sternum for a moment. 3 days. She texted back, "Okay, I'm here." He read it in the car on the way to the next location. He held the phone for a moment longer than necessary before putting it in his jacket pocket. Kwon found out about the disclosure filing by 9 that morning. His source inside the Financial Crimes Unit, not as deep as Min-jae's, but functional, gave him the news over a phone call that lasted 6 minutes, and Kwon sat afterward in the apartment he'd moved into temporarily and looked at the middle distance and made the calculation of a man who has played a strategic move and watched it get countered. He called Andre at 9:30. Andre answered on the second ring. "He filed a counter-disclosure," Kwon said in careful English. "It's bought him time." A pause. "How much time?" 72 hours. "So he's still... He's in Seoul," Kwon said. "He came back, which I expected." He paused. "But it changes the approach. The legal pressure won't move fast enough now." Andre's voice went to the register Kwon had learned to listen for, the one that meant he was shifting from strategy to something more immediate and personal. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying the woman is still in the safe house." Kwon said it simply. "I'm saying Min-jae is in Seoul managing 3 crises simultaneously. I'm saying that if you want to end this, there is a window." Silence on the line. "I know where the safe house is," Kwon said. Andre said nothing for a long moment. Then, "She won't come with me voluntarily." "I'm not suggesting she will," Kwon said. Another silence. Longer. "You want her gone," Andre said. "I want her back. Those aren't the same thing." "They produce the same immediate result," Kwon said, "which is that Min-jae's attention divides, and a man with a divided attention makes mistakes." He paused. "After that, she's your problem." The call lasted 4 more minutes. When it ended, Kwon sat very still for a moment, then picked up his second phone and sent a single text to a number with no name attached. In the Valley, at 11 in the morning, Lyla was at the kitchen table working through her data when Sung-ho came in from the perimeter and stood in the kitchen doorway with a look on his face that she had not seen him wear before. She looked up. "Someone's on the road," Sung-ho said. "A car, moving slow." She closed her laptop. "How far?" she said. 10 minutes, maybe less." She was already standing. "Does Min-jae know?" "Calling now." She looked at the window. The valley was still doing its beautiful, indifferent mountain thing, light on the ridgeline, the single road visible in a thin gray thread below. One car, moving slow. Could be nothing. Wrong road, lost driver, any ordinary explanation. She ran the odds the way she ran everything, systematically, and the odds said, not nothing. "What do we do?" she said to Sung-ho. He was on the phone already, rapid Korean, and he held up one finger. "Wait." And she waited, watching the road, watching the thin gray thread and the small dark shape on it that was getting larger. Sung-ho ended the call. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man delivering an order he did not generate. "Mr. Kang says we move," Sung-ho said. "Now. There's a second location 20 minutes further into the mountains. I know the road." "Is he coming?" Sung-ho's expression did the thing where it stayed professional and communicated something complicated underneath. "He's coming, but he's an hour out." 1 hour. She grabbed her bag, passport, hard drive, notebooks, phone. 30 seconds. She had this down to 30 seconds now. And she was at the back door behind Sung-ho when one of the perimeter men came in from the side entrance with the sharp-eyed look of someone delivering real-time information. He said something to Sung-ho in Korean. Sung-ho's jaw tightened. "What?" Lyla said. "There's a second car," Sung-ho said. "On the other road." She looked at him. "There's only one road in." There was only one road in, Sung Ho said. There's a track through the North Ridge. It requires a vehicle with clearance, but he was already on the phone again, one arm out to steer her toward the back. She moved. The back door opened onto a slope of scrubland and low trees, and the morning air hit her cold and clean and completely indifferent to the situation. And she followed Sung Ho down the slope with her bag across her chest and the prepaid phone in her hand, and she thought with the precise, unsparing clarity that came over her in crisis. She had always been this way, better under pressure than under stability, which was something Andre had once called a flaw, and which she had since reclassified as the most useful thing about herself. She thought, Andre is in one of those cars. She knew it the way she knew her own research. He had planned this, or Kwan had planned it, and Andre had agreed. And the specific detail of 2 cars on 2 approaches said that whoever had planned it had thought about cutting off exits, which was such a precise echo of every room she had ever been in with Andre. The way he arranged conversations to have no exit, the way he placed himself between her and doors, the way he designed situations so that the only available move was toward him, that she felt the familiarity of it like a key turning in a lock she had hoped to leave behind. Not this time. She kept moving down the slope and her shoes slid on wet leaves, and she caught a branch and kept her footing, and Sung Ho was 2 paces ahead, calling Min Jae's number again, and the morning was cold and clear, and somewhere on the mountain road below, 2 cars were closing the distance, and somewhere in Seoul, Min Jae was already driving. The track through the scrub bottomed out at a small outbuilding 50 yards from the main house where a second vehicle was kept. She had noticed it the first day without noting why she noticed it, the brain cataloging exit options below the level of conscious attention. Sung Ho reached it first and had the door up and the keys from a magnetic box on the frame inside, and she was in the passenger seat before the engine had fully caught. "How long to the ridge track?" she said. 12 minutes if the ground is dry." "Is the ground dry?" He looked at her with the first expression she had ever seen that was close to wry. "No." She held the door handle and he reversed out and the vehicle lurched on the uneven ground, and she watched the main house through the rear window and she saw at the edge of the property where the road met the gate, the first car pulling up. Dark vehicle. Moving with purpose. The back of her neck went cold. Then the car door opened. And Andre Calloway stepped out into the mountain morning, and he looked down the slope, and for one impossible second across 200 yards of hillside scrubland, he looked directly at where she was. She did not know if he could see her. She held completely still. The vehicle lurched forward onto the track, trees swallowing them, and the hillside disappeared behind the tree line, and she turned forward and held the door handle and breathed through her nose and thought with cold, sharp clarity about the 72-hour window, about Kwan and his calculations, about the organization fracturing in Seoul, about Min Jae driving an hour of mountain road, and every variable between here and the moment those variables resolved. Sung Ho's phone buzzed on the console. He glanced at it. His jaw tightened again. "What?" she said. He handed her the phone without taking his eyes off the narrow track. A text. From Min Jae's number. 4 words. "Don't stop. Keep moving." And then, 3 seconds later, a second text. "I'm coming. Trust me." She held the phone in both hands and the vehicle rocked over roots and loose stone on the ridge track, and the mountains rose gray and indifferent on both sides. And somewhere behind them on a wet hillside, Andre was standing in the cold morning air, having arrived at the last move he had available. And somewhere ahead of them on a Seoul highway, Min Jae was pushing a car as fast as it would go toward the same mountain. And Lyla Monroe, who had walked 6 steps toward a stranger in the rain and changed the entire geometry of her life, looked at those 4 words, "I'm coming, trust me," and felt something move through her that was not fear and was not faith and was not the particular self-betrayal of a woman attaching herself to rescue. It was something more specific than any of those. It was the feeling of a person who has done the math on someone, carefully, over weeks of proximity, and has arrived at a conclusion she trusts not because trusting is easy, but because the evidence has been precise and consistent and real. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and looked at the track ahead and said to Sung Ho, "How much further to the ridge?" 8 minutes, he said. "Then drive," she said. And the vehicle pushed forward into the mountain morning, and behind them the first car reached the empty safe house. And in Seoul, a man who ran an empire that didn't appear in business directories pressed the accelerator to the floor on a highway heading south, carrying everything he intended to bring back from this alive. The ridge track ran out after 7 minutes. Not because the track ended, it continued, technically, 2 tire ruts pressed into the hillside by vehicles that had come before. But because the rain that had not been dry when Sung-ho said it was not dry had been working on the ridge slope for 2 days, and what had been passable ground was now a skin of mud over loose shale, and the vehicle's rear wheels found the edge of this fact at exactly the wrong moment, slewing sideways with a sound that was less dramatic than it was definitive. Sung-ho corrected. The vehicle corrected back. The rear end did not. They stopped at an angle that said, "This is as far as this goes." Sung-ho was out of the vehicle before she fully understood they had stopped, assessing the rear wheels with the specific expressionless appraisal of a man calculating how wrong something is. He looked at her through the windshield and shook his head once. She got out. The ridge was higher than she had realized. The valley spread below them to the south, and she could see the roof of the safe house from here, and 2 dark vehicles on the road beside it, one of which was moving slowly along the property perimeter. She could not see figures clearly at this distance, but she did not need to. She knew who was down there. "How far to the second location on foot?" she said. Sung-ho looked at the ridge. 40 minutes. "And Min-jae?" Sung-ho checked his phone. 45 minutes out. She did the math. It was not comfortable math. "Then we move," she said. Sung-ho looked at her. He had the expression of a man who has received a significant number of directives in his professional life and was presently recalibrating who was giving them. Mr. Kang said, "Min-jae said, don't stop," she said. "We're not stopped. We're moving a different way." She pulled her bag across her chest and looked at the ridge track continuing on foot. "Come on." He came. They moved along the ridge in the cold morning air, Sung-ho slightly ahead and to her left, his phone in one hand, his other hand in his jacket in a way that told her there was something in his jacket she hadn't known about and chose not to examine. The ground was uneven, and the wet grass grabbed at her shoes, and the bag was heavy, and none of this was the thing she was thinking about. She was thinking about the safe house, about who was in those cars, about the specific way Andre moved when he had decided something, the deliberateness of it, the total absence of haste because haste implied uncertainty, and Andre, when he was certain, was never hurried. She had watched him be certain about her for 3 years. She knew what it looked like. She was also thinking about Min-jae in a car on a highway 45 minutes away, and the particular quality of those 4 words, "I'm coming. Trust me," and how different they were from every version of that phrase she had ever received, which had always been wrapped in the implication that trust was something she owed rather than something she chose. Her phone buzzed, prepaid, in her jacket pocket. She answered without looking at the number because there was only one number it could be. "Are you on the ridge?" Min-jae said. "Yes. Vehicle is stuck. We're moving on foot." A silence of precisely the length that meant he was recalculating. "How far from the secondary location?" Sung-ho says 35 minutes now. "Can you get there before—" He stopped. She heard something on his end, a voice, brief, and then he said, "Lyla, Andre is not alone. Kwon sent 2 men with him." "I know," she said. "I saw the cars." "You need to get to the secondary location and stay inside. It has a reinforced door. Sung-ho knows the code. Lock it and wait for me." "And you?" "I'm handling Seoul remotely." "Oh, Sejun filed the disclosure this morning. The unit is reviewing. 3 of the lieutenants have already come back. Kwon is losing ground fast enough that he'll know it by noon." "What happens when he knows it?" A pause. "He becomes more desperate, which makes the men he sent to that mountain more dangerous because they stop being an asset and become a liability he needs cleaned up." She held that. The cold air moved around her on the ridge and she kept walking. "Min-jae?" "Yes." "Don't get hurt getting here." Another pause. Different from the calculating ones. "I'll try," he said. She put the phone in her pocket and kept moving. They were 20 minutes from the secondary location when Sung-ho put a hand on her arm and stopped her. She stopped. He was looking down the western slope of the ridge, where a trail cut up from the valley floor. She followed his sight line and saw movement. 2 figures, moving fast, using the trees for partial cover with the efficiency of people who had been told what to look for. They had not taken the road. They had gone around. Sung-ho pushed her gently sideways behind a thicket of brush and pine and positioned himself in front of her, and she crouched in the wet brush and breathed through her nose and thought with cold clarity about the next 3 minutes. She thought about Andre in the valley, and she thought about Kwan on a phone somewhere losing his war and soul, and she thought about the specific terrible math of being a liability that needs cleaned up. She had been a liability to 2 men now, in 2 completely different ways, and both of them had decided the solution was the same: removal. She was tired of being someone else's equation. She straightened up behind the brush and looked at the secondary location. She could see the roofline from here, just barely, 200 yards further along the ridge. She looked at Sung-ho and at the 2 figures on the western slope, and she made a decision. She tapped Sung-ho on the shoulder. He looked back at her. She pointed to the secondary location. Then she pointed to the western slope. Then she looked at him steadily until he understood that she was not asking him to escort her. She was telling him to deal with what was on the western slope, while she covered the 200 yards alone. His face did something complicated. 200 yards, she said quietly. I can see the building. I know the door is reinforced. I just need the code. He looked at her for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. Then he said, barely above a murmur, 7419. She nodded. Fast, he said. Fast, she agreed. She went. She did not run. Running on wet ridge ground was a way to fall, and falling was not available right now. But she moved at the fastest walk she could manage, bag across her chest, eyes on the roofline, and she did not look at the western slope, because looking would slow her, and she had already accepted that there were things happening to her left that were not hers to manage. The 160 yards took 4 minutes that felt nothing like 4 minutes. The secondary location was a stone structure, older than the Seoul safe house, built into the ridge face so that 2 of its walls were the ridge itself. The door was metal, painted the dull gray of something that wanted to be ignored, and the keypad beside it had the specific weathered look of equipment designed for reliability rather than elegance. 7, 4, 1, 9. The lock released with a sound like a held breath letting go. She pushed the door and it swung heavy, and she was inside and pulling it closed behind her, and the lock re-engaged, and she stood in the dark interior with her back against the door and her heart doing something complex and rapid in her chest. She found the light. A single overhead, functional. Stone walls, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a cot, a cabinet, a radio set up on a shelf that was older than anything else in the room. She sat down on the floor with her back against the door and her bag in her lap, and she breathed. Outside, she heard nothing specific: the ridge, the wind, the ambient indifference of mountains. She did not know what Sung-ho was doing, and she could not afford to think about it in detail. She took out the prepaid phone and texted Min-jae. In the secondary location, door locked, Sung-ho is handling the slope. The response came in under 30 seconds. I see the ridge on GPS. 15 minutes. 15 minutes. She sat on the floor with her grandmother's earrings pressing into her palm through the fabric of the bag's outer pocket, and she thought about Atlanta, her mother's kitchen. The specific smell of her mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings, which was not a smell she had thought about consciously in over a year, because nostalgia had been one of the first things Andre had made impractical. He had a way of pathologizing her attachment to her past, framing it as an unwillingness to commit to the present, and she had slowly stopped reaching for it. She reached for it now. The kitchen. The Sunday smell. Her mother's voice asking how she took her coffee as if she had not watched her take it the same way for 20 years. She was going to call her mother when this was over. She was going to call her and say, I'm okay, I've been not okay, and now I'm getting better. I need to tell you some things. Outside, a sound. She went still. Footsteps. Not Sung-ho's. She had learned Sung-ho's walk in 3 days of proximity, the way you learn anyone's walk when you're paying attention, the rhythm of it, and this was not his rhythm. This was someone moving along the ridge, face toward the door, not fast, not slow, deliberate. She stood up, stayed against the wall beside the door, not in front of it. The door was reinforced, the lock was mechanical and solid. She knew this, and she breathed through knowing it, and she held the phone in both hands and did not text because texting meant looking down. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A pause. Then, through the metal, muffled but completely recognizable, "Lyla," Andre's voice. She did not answer. "I know you're in there." His voice had the quality she recognized from the kitchen that night, 3 weeks and a lifetime ago. Controlled, compressed, the voice of a man managing himself. "Lyla, I just want to talk. That's all this is." She pressed her back against the stone wall and said nothing. "You have no idea what you've walked into," he said. "That man, you don't know what he is. I'm trying to get you out of this. That's all I've ever been trying to do." The reframing. She had known it was coming. He had never been able to hold a position that cast him as the antagonist for longer than it took to find a restructuring. And here it was. The same move he had made 1,000 times. "I am the one trying to save you. Everything I've done has been for you." She had believed it, in various forms, for 2 years. She felt the ghost of that belief, faint and distant, the echo of a frequency she no longer tuned to. "Andre," she said, loud enough to carry through the door. A beat of silence. "I'm here." "Go home," she said. A longer silence. When his voice came back, the controlled quality had shifted almost imperceptibly, just enough for her to hear it, because she had learned to hear it, the shift from management to something that lived beneath management. "You don't mean that." "I do." "You're scared. You're in a building you've never been in the middle of nowhere, and the man you've been trusting is—" "Go home, Andre." She said it the same way, same flat register. "This is the last time I'm going to say it." The silence this time was different. The quality of it changed. Then, a sound against the door. Not a knock. Something harder, more deliberate, and then another, and she understood that he was testing the door, which meant he had moved past talking. She texted Min Jae, "He's at the door." The response? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. She moved to the table and picked up one of the chairs, not as a weapon, as something to do with her hands, to hold while she waited, to give the adrenaline somewhere to go. She stood in the center of the room and held the chair and watched the door and breathed. She heard voices outside, Andre's and then another, the second man from the slope, and they were speaking in low, rapid English, and she caught enough to understand. The door was not moving, and they knew it, and they were arguing about next steps, and the second man was saying something about leaving, about the situation in Seoul, about Kwon being unreachable. Kwon unreachable. She filed that. Then, the sound of a vehicle on the ridge, engine working hard on the slope, coming fast enough to be noticed. The voices outside went quiet. The vehicle stopped. Doors. Footsteps on the ridge, more than one set, and then Min Jae's voice, outdoor volume, the first time she had ever heard him speak above a controlled register, and it had a different quality than she expected. Not louder in the theatrical sense, just fully itself. The voice of a man who has decided the situation no longer requires management of his own volume. She couldn't make out the words. She moved to the door. She put her hand on the lock. She waited exactly long enough to be sure, which was 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, she heard the specific back and forth of a confrontation that was deciding its own level. Voices, positioning, the audible negotiation of two groups of people working out whether this was going to be one thing or another. Then she heard Andre's voice go up. Not calm anymore, not controlled. The thing underneath, raw, genuine, and for the first time in 3 years, entirely unmanaged. And she heard Min Jae respond. She opened the door. The ridge in the early morning, stone and wet grass and mountain light, and the 4 people on it. Min Jae and a man she didn't know, Andre and the second man from Kwon's team. All of them stopped in the configuration of a confrontation that had been moving towards something and had not yet arrived. Min Jae looked at her when the door opened. Andre looked at her. For one suspended second, every person on that ridge was looking at Lyla Monroe standing in the doorway of a stone building on a mountainside outside Seoul, and she looked back at all of them with the clear, exhausted, utterly specific gaze of a woman who has spent 3 years being looked at like a problem to be solved and has finally, irrevocably, stopped. "This is done," she said. To Andre. Directly. Without heat, because Heat would have given him something to manage and she was not interested in giving him anything anymore. Whatever you thought you were going to accomplish here, it's done. Kwan is losing. The legal case is collapsing. And I am not going anywhere with you. Not today. Not ever. Not for any reason you could construct. Andre's face moved through several things in rapid succession. She recognized all of them. She had a catalog, accumulated over 3 years, of every expression his face made and what lived underneath it. She watched them go, the public face, the reasonable face, the wounded face, and then the one underneath all of them, the one she had only seen occasionally, and which was the truest, most unmediated version of him, which was simply the face of a man who cannot tolerate being refused. "You have no idea," he said, and his voice had lost its architecture. "What it took me to get here, what I gave up, what I did for you." "You did it for you," she said. "Everything you ever did was for you. I was just the surface you did it on." He moved. Not toward the door, toward her. One step, and Min-jae was already in motion, and the man beside Min-jae was already in motion, and the second man from Kwan's team grabbed Andre's arm and said something short and urgent that stopped him at exactly the wrong distance. Too close. Right at the threshold. Lyla did not step back. She held her ground in the doorway of the stone building, and she looked at Andre Calloway at close range for the last time, and she felt something happen in her chest that was not hatred and was not grief and was not forgiveness. It was recognition, the specific, unsparing recognition of someone who has finally seen a thing for what it is, not what they needed it to be, and can never unsee it. "Andre," she said. "Quiet now. You need to leave, and then you need to call a lawyer, because the immigration irregularities are documented, and the charges that go with them are not small, and you're going to need help." He stared at her. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," she said. "I'm saying it because it's true, and because I spent 2 years in a relationship with someone who never told me true things when comfortable lies were available, and I'm not going to do that to you even now." She paused. "Go home, Andre." The second man from Kwan's team said something to Andre that she didn't understand, and whatever it was the thing that finally moved him. Not her words, not Min-jae's presence, but the practical information from the man beside him about what was happening in Seoul and what it meant for the options on this ridge. Andre looked at her for one more second. She held the look. Then he turned and walked away. She watched him go. She stood in the doorway and watched him walk down the ridge track with the second man, and she kept watching until the mountain folded them into its geography and they were gone, and then she stood there for a moment longer because she needed to be sure that the part of her that had known him for 3 years had fully registered the closing of the door. It had. She turned around. Min-jae was 3 feet away, and he was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, not in any of the configurations of the last 3 weeks, an expression that was unguarded in the way of someone who has been running on adrenaline and decision-making for 48 hours and has just, momentarily, stopped. He had a cut on his jaw. Recent, maybe an hour old. She looked at it. "What happened?" she said. "The Mapo office," he said. "Kwan sent someone. It's handled." "Handled," she repeated. "I'm fine." He said it the way people say it when they are approximately fine but do not want to spend time on the qualifier. "Are you?" "I'm fine," she said. Same qualifier, same understanding between them, that fine was a functional word and not a complete one. They looked at each other on the cold ridge, and the morning light was doing something specific to the mountains behind him, and Sung-ho appeared from the tree line with a scrape on his forearm and the expression of a man who had resolved the slope situation and did not need to elaborate on how. Min-jae looked at her for a moment longer. Then he said very quietly, "You opened the door." "I know," she said. "I told you to stay inside." "I know," she said again. "I decided not to." He held her gaze. And then, unexpectedly, something crossed his face that she had never seen there. Not a smile exactly, not the dry, minimal humor she had caught glimpses of over dinner. Something deeper and less controlled. Almost, if she had to name it, relief. "Yes," he said. "You did." They went back to Seoul that afternoon, in Min-jae's car, 3 hours on the highway with Sung-ho driving, and the two of them in the back seat with the specific silence of people who have been through something and are now in the part that comes after, where the adrenaline clears and the weight of it lands. Min-jae worked his phone the entire drive, calls, texts, clipped exchanges in Korean, and she worked her laptop on her lap, 3 hours of uninterrupted research drafting that produced more coherent pages than she had managed in the previous 2 weeks combined. At one point, Min-jae said, without looking up from his phone, "How's the chapter?" "It's working," she said. "The sampling issue wasn't what I thought it was." "What was it?" The collection methodology in one district was standardized differently from the others. Data wasn't wrong, just incompatible. Once I account for it, the model clears. She paused. "It actually strengthens two of the arguments I'd been doubting." He looked up from his phone. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to think of as his research face, the one he wore when she was explaining something he found genuinely interesting. "Good," he said. It was such a small word. It was such a complete word. She looked back at her laptop and let herself feel it. The legal situation resolved over the following 11 days, which were not clean days. Nothing about those 11 days was clean. But they were days with forward motion, which was different from the stasis of the preceding weeks. Oh Se-jun was relentless in a way that she found personally satisfying. A small man with a large case and the manner of someone who considered losing a personal insult. The Financial Crimes Unit reviewed the full documentation and found what Min-jae had said they would find. Not innocence, exactly. The organization existed and did what it did, but insufficiency. The Hanam records, without context, had appeared to show one thing. With context, they showed something more complicated and less prosecutable. The unit did not close its file. It would never entirely close its file. But the immediate action was suspended pending further investigation, which meant years, which meant functional resolution. Andre's immigration complaint against Lyla was dismissed inside a week. Her documentation was clean, as it had always been, and the complaint's origins, a man with his own fraudulent visa filing, undermined it structurally. Dr. Lim called Lyla herself to deliver the news, which she did not have to do, and which Lyla appreciated with the specific appreciation of someone who has been reminded that most people are not Andre. Andre himself was detained by immigration authorities on the 8th day. Not because of anything Min-jae did directly. The file had been building through official channels since the irregular visa had been flagged as part of the Kwon investigation's peripheral disclosures. But because information had a way of moving once it started moving, he was held, processed, charged with immigration fraud and a related count of harassment, and his lawyer, a man he'd found quickly, which meant expensively, entered negotiations that would eventually produce a deportation agreement in lieu of prosecution, conditional on his return to the United States, and a restraining order that carried international notification provisions. She received the notification of the restraining order on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the desk in her rebuilt university office space with her research notebooks open around her. She read it twice. Then she put her phone down and opened her laptop and stared at the screen for a moment, and her eyes stung. And she let them. Because the things that had lived in her chest for 3 years needed somewhere to go, and this was as good a moment as any. This specific Tuesday morning in Seoul, with the research she had built and protected, and never let him take spread across the desk in front of her. She pressed the back of her hand against her eyes for 30 seconds. Then she got back to work. Kwon Tae-hyun was a longer and more complicated resolution. He had been dismantling his position within Min-jae's organization for months before the crisis broke open, and what he had built outside it, the men he'd approached, the accounts he'd redirected, the operational knowledge he'd packaged and prepared to take with him, took careful, methodical unwinding. Min-jae did not approach this the way Lyla had half expected a man in his position to approach it, which was decisively and in a way that made examples. He approached it the way she had come to understand he approached most things, with strategic patience and a preference for making the next step obvious rather than forcing any particular outcome. Kwon's external network collapsed faster without organizational support. The men he'd flipped came back, as Min-jae had predicted they would when the wind changed, because they were practical men and practicality adjusted to circumstance. The accounts were recovered through channels that Oh Se-jun supervised with the same personal affront energy he brought to everything. And Kwon himself, finding his leverage exhausted and his position untenable, made the decision that Min-jae had perhaps always known he would make. He left. Not dramatically, not with confrontation. He simply was in Seoul, and then he was not, and the organization absorbed his absence the way an organization absorbs most things, which was imperfectly and then completely. Min-jae told her about Kwan's departure one evening in late November, over the kitchen table in the building that had become, without either of them designing it, the place where their days ended. She had moved out of the guest room 6 weeks earlier, into an apartment 2 buildings over, her own place, her own key, paid with her own fellowship stipend. But the evenings had a way of finding them at this table, which she had examined with the same systematic attention she brought to everything and had concluded was not a problem requiring solution. "Do you know where he went?" she said. "I have a sense," Min-jae said. "Are you going to No," he said, simply. "He's not a threat anymore. He was a threat when he had access. Without access, he's a man with operational knowledge that will age out and a grievance that's already too expensive to act on." She absorbed this. "Is that cold, or is that accurate?" "Both," he said. She looked at him across the table. He was thinner than he had been in September. The 11 days had taken something visible from him, and the weeks after had not entirely returned it, and she had watched this without knowing how to name what watching it cost her. He looked like himself, but a version of himself that had been used harder, which was something she recognized from her own mirror. "I want to ask you something," she said. He waited. "What are you going to do with the organization?" She held his gaze. "Now that Kwan is gone, and the legal situation is what it is, what do you actually want?" He was quiet for long enough that she knew he had been waiting for someone to ask, or waiting to be ready to answer, or both. "I've been thinking about that for a while," he said. "I know. There are parts of it that I can walk away from," he said carefully, "parts that were always transitional. The organization as it exists currently it's not what it was when I built it. I built it for specific reasons that no longer all apply." He paused. "The things it does that are not compatible with a life I can actually stand behind. Those I've been unwinding for longer than I've known you." She held that. "How long?" 3 years, he said. "Since the woman Kwan referenced. The witness." He looked at the table. "I spent 6 months after that looking at what I'd built and trying to decide if I was the person running it or the person trapped in it. I decided I was the person running it, which meant I could change what I was running. And the legitimate holdings companies are legitimate," he said. "They became that. It took time." He looked up. "I'm not clean, Lyla. I want to be clear about that. The years before the pivot are the years before the pivot, and they happened. But what exists now is something I could explain, mostly, to someone who needed an explanation." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about systems, her particular professional obsession, the way problems become invisible when the system that creates them becomes normalized, the way change happens not through dramatic rupture, but through the slow, consistent application of different choices. "You've been changing the system from inside it," she said. He looked at her. "Yes." "That's what you've been doing." "Yes." She nodded slowly. She did not say she approved, because approval was not the frame. It was his life and his accounting, not hers to grade. But she understood it, which was different, and understanding was what she had to offer. "Okay," she said. He held her gaze. "Okay. Min-jae." She said his name the way she had the night of the first confession, with the slight weight of someone crossing a threshold they have been standing at for a while. "I know what I feel. I've known for a while. I've been careful about saying it because I've learned to be careful, and because the circumstances haven't exactly been—" She stopped, took a breath. Straightforward. He had gone very still. "But I'm done being careful about it," she said. "Because careful was what I was with Andre, except careful with him meant making myself smaller. And what I mean when I say careful with you is that I've been making sure I trust what I know." She held his gaze. "I trust what I know." Min-jae was quiet for a moment that stretched exactly as long as it needed to. Then he said, simply and without theater, "I love you, Lyla." She had expected it, in the abstract, because she was not a person who missed data points. She had not expected the specific physical impact of hearing it, the way it landed in her chest, not like an arrival, but like a completion, like a sentence that has been building for a long time, finally reaching its period. "I know," she said. "I love you too." He reached across the table. Not her hand this time. Her wrist, very lightly. The same wrist Andre had grabbed in a kitchen that felt like another century. And the difference between the two grips was the difference between two completely different understandings of what another person was for. She turned her hand over and held his. They sat at the kitchen table in the Seoul night and held that, and it was quiet, and it was enough. 6 months passed the way months pass when the emergency has ended and the ordinary has not yet become invisible again, with texture, with attention, with the specific quality of people who have been through enough to understand that ordinary is not a lesser thing. Lyla submitted her 3rd chapter in February. It was the best work she had done in 3 years, which she knew not because her committee told her so, though they did, but because she could feel the quality of the thinking in it, the absence of the self-doubt that had been Andre's longest-running edit on her mind, the return of the researcher who had boarded a plane in Atlanta, certain she was going to become someone extraordinary. She called her mother on a Saturday in March. The call lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. She told her most of it, not all, not the details that would require more context than one phone call could contain, but the shape of it, the real shape. And her mother was quiet in the way her mother was quiet when she was holding something big. And at the end she said, in a voice that meant she was not going to cry about this on the phone, "I always knew you were going to find your way back." "I didn't go anywhere, Mom," Lyla said. "Baby," her mother said, with the patient precision of someone who has raised a brilliant child and knows exactly when they are being technically correct in a way that misses the point. "Yes, you did." She was right. Lyla knew she was right. She let it be right. Min Jae proposed in April, not with a production, not with theater. They were in his kitchen. She spent enough time there that it had become a shared space in the way of things that happen by accumulation rather than decision. And he was attempting to make his mother's recipe for doenjang jigae, which he had attempted 3 previous times with varying degrees of success. And she was sitting on the counter telling him the fermentation on the paste was off, and he should have started over, and he was ignoring this assessment. And at some point he turned around with the spoon in his hand and looked at her with the completely unmanaged directness she had come to know as his most honest expression and said, "Marry me." She looked at him, at the spoon, at the paste on the spoon that was, she maintained, incorrectly fermented. "The soup is wrong," she said. "I know," he said. "Marry me anyway." She felt the smile happen in her chest before it reached her face. She let it reach her face. "Yes," she said. He set the spoon down. He came to where she was sitting on the counter and stood in front of her, and put both hands on her face with the careful, unhurried quality of someone who is holding something they intend to keep, and she put her hands over his, and the kitchen smelled of incorrectly fermented paste, and it was the most perfect thing she could have imagined. They were married in July. Small. A judge, because the paperwork was Min Jae's preference, and Lyla found she had no strong opinions about the container, only the contents. Sung Ho was there, in a suit that suggested the occasion had been important enough to revisit his wardrobe. Dr. Lim came, which surprised Lyla until she thought about it and realized that Dr. Lim had been the first person to ask her if she was safe, and had never stopped keeping the question available. Oh Sejun sent a plant to the apartment with a card that contained only a case number and the word closed, which was the most Oh Sejun gift possible. Lyla's mother came from Atlanta. She arrived 2 days before and stayed a week after, and the specific experience of watching her mother in Min Jae's kitchen, their kitchen now, it had become that incrementally, trying to reconcile her mental image of what Lyla's life had been with what she was witnessing, was something Lyla held carefully and completely. Her mother and Min Jae found each other, eventually, over the 3rd dinner, because her mother had decided to make her fried chicken recipe, and Min Jae had made the mistake of suggesting a modification based on a Korean technique. and this had produced a 20-minute culinary debate of genuine substance and mutual respect that ended with both of them trying both versions, and her mother saying, with the exact concession face she always made when she had been wrong, "All right, that's better." Min-jae said nothing. He just smiled, which was the right call. The restaurant came from both of them simultaneously, the way good ideas sometimes come. Not from a meeting, not from a plan, but from a conversation that revealed a shared answer to a question neither of them had known they were asking. They called it 2 tables. It was small, 16 seats, which Min-jae's property knowledge located in a Mappo storefront that had good bones and difficult rent, which they negotiated down with the patient precision of 2 people who had survived worse negotiations. The menu was built from both mothers' recipes, cross-hatched with each other's influences, because the fried chicken and the doenjang jigai turned out to inhabit the same flavor logic in ways that neither of them had expected, and that the restaurant's first chef, a young woman from Busan, with opinions stronger than her age suggested, confirmed with the authority of someone who knew what she was doing. Lyla managed the business side on weekends. Min-jae managed the property and supplier relationships. The legitimate holdings companies ran with sufficient independence that his time was largely his own, which was a sentence that had taken 3 years of deliberate restructuring to become true, and which was true now. She finished her dissertation in October, defended in November. Her committee's response was the kind of response that researchers spend careers working toward. Not enthusiasm, exactly, because enthusiasm was not the currency of a good academic committee, but engagement, the leaning forward quality of people who have encountered a piece of work that does something genuinely new. Dr. Lim shook her hand after and said, "What's next?" "Publication," Lyla said, "and then I want to look at the methodology in the southern districts. I think the same collection bias exists there, and I can prove it." "Good," Dr. Lim said. The same word Min-jae used, the same completeness. Lyla thought sometimes about the geometry of it, the 6 steps she had taken toward a stranger on a rainy sidewalk, which had seemed like desperation, and which she now understood had been something she didn't have a clean word for, some combination of instinct and exhaustion and a self-preservation mechanism that ran deeper than fear. She thought about what she had been trying to survive and what she had walked into while surviving it, and how the 2 things were not separable, because that was how life actually worked. The escape route and the destination were the same road. She was not saved. She was clear about that in the way she was clear about her data. Precise, unwilling to round up for the sake of a cleaner story. She had saved herself by leaving, by making the ask, by choosing to stay when staying required choosing, by doing the work of rebuilding herself from the inside while the outside was still in chaos. Min-jae had provided conditions. That was different from rescue, and the difference mattered enormously. He knew this. She knew he knew it because they had talked about it in the way they talked about most things. At a table, directly, with the specific quality of 2 people who had learned that honesty was not a virtue they could afford to perform only occasionally. On a night in late November, the year almost finished, they were closing 2 tables together. Last tables gone, lights down to working level, the kitchen clean, and the place exhaling. She was at the front tallying the evening, and he was restacking chairs in the back with the particular focused efficiency he brought to physical tasks. And she looked up from the numbers and watched him without him knowing she was watching, and she thought about the man she had first read in the rain. That unflinching stillness, the hand covering hers, the offer of a room with a lock. And she thought about everything the subsequent months had revealed about who he was beneath that surface. The complexity, the history, the slow work he had been doing before she arrived and had continued after, the mother he had never stopped carrying, the promise he had made in grief and kept without announcement. He looked up and found her watching. He didn't say anything. He held the look. She turned back to the numbers. 6 covers at the last table had the tasting menu. "I think we need to adjust the 3rd course." "The fermentation again?" he said. "The fermentation again." She heard the quiet sound of a chair being set down, and then his footsteps, and he sat across from her at the front table and looked at the numbers with her. And they sat in the quiet of the closed restaurant they had built from a conversation and an incorrect soup. And outside Seoul was being entirely itself in the November dark, and inside it was warm. Neither of them had been rescued by the other. They had simply, in the specific way of two people who have been damaged precisely enough to know what they actually need, found each other at the right intersection of circumstances, and chosen, not once, but every day, in small and large and medium decisions that accumulated into a life, to stay. Lyla Monroe had crossed the world to become someone extraordinary. It turned out she already was. She had just needed to remember it in a place where no one was working to make her forget. She closed the ledger. Minjae picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "Ready," he said. "Ready," she said. They turned off the lights. They went home.